Hello and welcome all back to Election Time News Australia. Today is Saturday, July 19th, 2025, and today we're doing a special out of cycle prediction because today is the 2025 Tasmanian state elections. So we're going to be doing the final prediction for that on our map here and with uh, who is going to end up being in the who is going to end up winning, what parties are going to get what percent of the vote, and more with a new Australian prediction sheet. Election Time News, your one stop for all things elections and politics, from summations to poll reviews and news. Subscribe below for more content like this about American, Canadian, and Australian elections. Also, make sure to follow the Substack, Threads, Instagram, and X. I'll be getting election news and similar things via posts on all of those platforms, which I've already done a good bit of on Substack. Also, that's where the podcast is hosted. The first episode is out, and there's also going to be some in-depth explanations of what happened in the elections later today. There's going to be explanations of that coming on the second episode, as well as some more updates for American House races and the Senate. Remember, there's never a dull moment in politics. There's always something to talk about, and there's always something going on. Election time news, we will be on it. So now moving on to the video here, we have the elections are of course happening today. Jeremy Rockcliffe versus Dean Winter for the premier of the state of Tasmania. And so what we have here is our map. I hastily drew this on GeoJSON, so it's not pretty by any means, but it does functionally work. We have Braddon, Bass, we have Lyons, we have Clark, and we have Franklin. Of course, all of those 7 members, 5 each with the proportional system here. So based on that, we're looking at statewide popular vote likely is going to end up actually having another win by the Liberals. Mainly that's going to be from the large polls from Demos AU is going to be weighed a bit more. 3.2 point margin of error here again by YouGov with Labor very, very close. But both of the very large sample sizes from Demos AU have a relatively considerable lead, a relatively considerable lead for the Liberals. Only YouGov has had Labor in the lead, other than EMRS. That was back in May. Even the recent ones have had them as high as 11 points ahead. And so now with these recent numbers again, we're going to be looking more at a potentially a somewhat blowout. Still not going to be as large as it was back then because they're going to be losing a bit of support more so than the Labor Party, but a lot of more support. The Liberals are mainly going to be losing to the National Party after the two split. I believe that it was under the coalition last year. Independents are going to be gaining a lot of vote here. So that's really going to be the uh, the main driving force here. There's gonna be nominal change from the SFF, but where the last numbers are from is gonna be from the Jackie Lambie network, who's not contesting. So there's probably still gonna be some of the vote there. That's probably gonna be mostly under the other vote, but that's where a lot of that vote is coming from. So most likely, actually, here both the Liberals and Labor are going to gain 1. The Greens are going to go down 3, just because there's not that many candidates that were seen here all across the board. The only ones that they really showed anything was Clark. So I'm really not sure whether that's just not shown elsewhere or what. National Party going to be losing 2. They don't have enough support. They're not as recognized as the Liberals. So the National Party is basically going to completely collapse here. They definitely would have benefited from staying in the coalition. SFF still basically nothing. Independents are going to be gaining 3 most likely. As of right now, there's just a lot of independents showing up here. So what we have first off is going to be that we're expecting 15 seats for the Liberals, but then still there's not going to be a minority government for the Liberals, just barely. 43% of the government, 31.5% being Labor. That's going to be quite a bit off. Liberals are going to disproportionately get more here, but it really depends on these. I didn't really do too many calculations based on where these votes would go, but this is just a rough generalization based on this. So to start things off, going into Bass, so definitely for Bass, we're gonna have a that's Braden. Bass Archer is definitely gonna lead things off for the number one, even though that was relatively old. Archer's almost at 20%, which is like double the next candidate. So Archer's almost certainly gonna be the first candidate there. So that's gonna be the first seat for the Liberals. Finley is pretty close behind. In theory, depending on how much extra Archer has, it might go enough to Ferguson or even Fairs, depending on the. It's probably gonna be Ferguson, considering that he was the one that led last time. That he could end up beating out for the second seat. If we look at the last time in Bass, you can see that it was Ferguson and then O'Byrne for that second spot, which is basically what we're looking at here. Most likely second place is going to end up being, and that's what 13.7 is for that other. O'Byrne is not running here again. So Finley probably is likely going to be next. You got 10.8% last time. It's a bit of a drop. Probably going to be a bit closer to that number, though. Ferguson is probably going to be second once you get that transfer vote from him, his victory over. Then you're probably going to be potentially seeing Razzie or maybe Green. Razzie or Green are basically interchangeable for spot number 4. It completely depends on how much extra support he can pick off from the Labor Party when you get that transferable vote. Green and Razzie are the exact same number, so most likely Green is actually going to be first there. Just because it's most likely going to go to the same party, so Green is probably actually going to be fourth. But that would be assuming zero error whatsoever. And if you look here, in Bass, actually number 4 was in fact a Liberal after the actually that was actually basically the coalition back then. It was actually a Labor Party. But Finley was able to pull a win there. So these are basically interchangeable. Razzie's slight lead there just because, if anything, the Labor Party is probably going to get a bit under that. That's probably going to be a bit more than that. So if anything, actually, now that I think about it, most likely Green is actually going to beat out Razzie for this seat there. So because there's going to be more of the Labor vote right there. So I'm just, there's a final poll that came out just earlier today. This is just the one that just came out yesterday, right before the election there. So that's really going to be the contest as far as that's concerned. Fairs is really going to be a relatively competitive there. He's only at 4.1% though, so but once you get past the first 4 or 5, it's going to be a bit more contested. So you have Green is already done. So now you're sitting with all these people right around 4. Could end up being Pentland, who I do have also getting on board as well. Fairs and Pentland are basically interchangeable. But most likely it's going to be 3 to 2 to 2 in Bass, if I had to guess. I could probably just duplicate this, but if we look at the map here, it's going to be 3 to 2 to 2 in Bass, so that's going to be a split right there. Should probably actually have 7 shades, but oh well. And so they end up with, well, none of them are actually going to get over 4, so that's going to be 3, that's going to be 3, so, that's going to be the most likely is going to be Bass for the popular vote. We have 30.5%. That's actually down. They had over a third of the vote last time. We're looking at the general. It's going to be pretty close. 36-34 here. There's definitely a chance that Labor could absolutely overperform. We could see something like we did for the general. But if we look at the one last time, sorry, it's over here. It was 38-30. That's an 8-point lead. So even this is quite a bit of a narrowing up. Both of them are losing a lot more towards independents, which is interesting considering the fact that, no independents won last time. There's actually a lot more support for independents across the state. There's only 3 here right now. yet. Now we're looking at potentially up to 7, so that's going to be plus 4. I don't know where the... Yeah, there's 3 independents, 7 is going to be plus 4. Okay, I have no idea how that got in there. Okay, anyway, an expanded seat, so I don't know exactly, but we're looking at independents are going to gain up to 11% based off of the overall numbers here. We're looking at up to 15%. I think this is probably going to be on the higher end because that could mean it's down to 11%, which would still be a relatively large gain. I mean, they got 8.2% in the last one. I have it up at 19, which is apparently actually a typo. Absolutely. So the Liberals are at 30 and a half. It's really much lower. I think I must have flipped something up. I was trying to quickly construct this, and I think I got this mixed up a bit. So that's probably going to be around like 11.5% or so. I transferred it over incorrectly. I had a quick calculation sheet, and I messed it up, and that was 30. Let me check real quick. 35.8 it says. So 35.8. All right, and then labor was also going to be up a bit to 28, 29. All right, that's correct. 15.8. Yes, okay. Well, no, it's going to be 19.1. All right, and the nationals, 1.8. It's quite a bit lower than it actually says. 3.1. Okay. Then SFF, 2.3. Shouldn't be 1.3. Okay, so it's actually 11.2. All right, so there we go. All right, so apparently there's actually going to be a bit of loss here again, both of them, but in general, the Greens are going to be gaining a good bit. The Independents are going to be gaining a small amount. That's mainly where it's going to be going. From the Lackley network is really going to be the one that's losing out here. Obviously, it doesn't matter. They're not contesting. That's going to be 8.1% to be redistributed. Either way, 3 to 2 to 2, if I had to guess. For Bass right here, that is going to be a tight start for those two, but things are going to get a bit more difficult once you get to Braddon because these 3 are most likely going to be the ones at the bottom. The Liberals are most likely going to basically just slaughter Labor here. This is going to be one where they're continuing to do very well. They did very well in 2024. And even then, Labor's actually gaining. Liberals are losing, but a lot of it's going to be going towards the independent vote. Let me make sure this is correct. 17. Yeah, looks like this one's right. Okay, so I'm looking at 41% for the Liberals, 25 for the for Labor, around 10% for Green, give or take a bit. EMRS actually did have 10% there. SFF around 2.5%. That's pretty variable. But the Independents getting around up to 20% really is going to be the game changer here. We have only Garland though. Braddon had Garland at 7th place last time. Could be getting up to 2nd. That's going to be really the game changer here. He's at 13.7%. That's basically that's 2nd place here, depending on how much Rockcliffe drops off, who, of course, is, in fact, the current premier. So he's going to be obviously leading in Braddon. That's not going to be that surprising. But then we have Garland is most likely going to be actually 2nd place. But then we're probably actually going to have more. There's going to be so much of a surplus vote from Rockcliffe. Garland could be 3rd or 4th, depending on how strong these candidates actually end up doing. I have Pierce and Ellis, who are both around 5.5%. Those are basically interchangeable based on how many of those votes end up coming from Rockcliffe. But then you end up having Dow at the bottom, and then some of those transferable votes could either go to Broad or Dipros. So those are basically interchangeable, or in theory, you could actually get another candidate in here. But I mean, considering the fact that it's down to 2.4%, I'm not really sure that's going to be enough to actually count Jason in. So Janch, it looks like. Okay, so but then at that point, this is the most likely the slate. I'm just not sure what order it might end up being in. But with that slate, we would have 3 to 3 to 1. That's actually 3 to 2 to 2. Okay, so 3 to 2 to 2. Okay, there we go. And then for Braden, we have 3 to 1. This is actually better, believe it or not, even though they're doing quite a bit worse on the popular vote. So that's going to be interesting to see that. But now Liberals do have a lead still 6 to 5 at this point. But I mean, that was quite a bit of a lead in the popular vote at this point. Relatively competitive still, but once we get to Clark, that's definitely going to open things up a bit more. I definitely could see the Labor Party actually winning the popular vote in Clark. I mean, this one's basically a four-way race between Labor, Liberals, Greens, and Independents. But just based off of the trends, I think that Liberals are actually going to narrowly win this one, just because there's probably going to be a bit of a pushback, as we generally see from right after a major election. There's going to be some pushback from the elected government. So most likely the Liberals are going to narrowly win, which you also see from this recent one from Demos AU. A relatively large margin of error, but still it's most likely going to end up being a potential Liberal victory unless the Labor Party can somehow carry their momentum. National Party wasn't shown up here, so I really had nothing to go off of, but most likely Johnson's actually going to be the first one in 17.3. Barely anyone else, only with the exception of one, is even breaking 10%. But then you get Burnett, who's basically another front runner in and of himself. Archer's probably going to be in there somewhere. I wouldn't be surprised if Archer actually did get in just because of 4.3. There's going to be a lot of transferable votes from Johnson to go to other independents, but the question is where from there, Willie, where you're gonna go, probably Haddad. So Haddad's definitely gonna be on there. Burnett and Bailey are probably both gonna be carried, considering they're both over 7% of the vote. It was Bailey and Burnett 9.9, 5.4 last time. So most likely Willie and Haddad are both going to get in, considering that they were both relatively high last time as well. Fermi and Beckrith, I'm not really sure about how much. And Ogilvy could end up actually winning, even though he also did lose last time. Rematches don't really work out that well, as I've said before, basically in any context, in any situation. But sometimes they do. So, and considering it was this close, that's not really that much of a lead. That's so 27.1, and that's 0.8. 0.8 divided by 27. So it's not that large of a lead. So you're going to end up having a kind of a difficult rerun, but Ogilvy could end up being the candidate there. I'm not as sure about that one, if anything, but it could be Vermi. Vermi's most likely going to end up being the candidate, but it could actually end up being Ogilvy and Baracus if Vermi does poorly enough, because it's a relatively high margin of error, 5.1%, and they're well within that. So Clark is actually the one that I'm definitely least certain about, and concerning the fact that but that's not going to be enough to flip the lead, but it probably could end up being like 3 to 1. But as of right now, I do have it 2 to 2 to 2 to 1 in Clark. That is going to be a pretty interesting one to watch. That's probably going to be the main one to watch. Is going to be in Clark. So that's going to be giving the both of the seats for the Greens is the only one where they have them listed. They might be listed as independents elsewhere. I'm not 100% sure. I didn't look into that much. But Franklin, Liberals are almost certainly going to be leading, even though both Liberals and Labor are losing vote. So is Green. Almost all of it is going towards the independents in Franklin, believe it or not. 35%. They're getting only 22, 31%, and 12, which are all three of them are down from their 2024 numbers. Meanwhile, the independents are gaining up to 20%. So 23% right there, actually. The SFF isn't even listed there. I don't know why they used up that slot, considering obviously they're not contesting this election. So we have George and O'Byrne. They're basically going to be able to easily carry each other at this point because, again, Winter's only one with over 10 and Abbott's narrowly. Meanwhile, we're at 18 and 13, and they also are easily carrying the popular vote at this point. So I wouldn't be surprised. Excuse me. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe even another independent managed to slack on there. But those are easily going to get carried into the session here based on those high numbers. But then you probably have Winter over Abbott's just because I did have him ahead of Abbott's, even though they have a slightly lower number because he is the prospective premier. He is the opposition leader, so that's really going to be a slight boost. Um, but if Labor doesn't do that strong, if there is any sort of pushback against them, you could say, like if this YouGov doesn't end up coming true, if this does, then absolutely Winter's going to end up being number 3, maybe even number 2, depending on how well the night goes. But if there's anything close to a 31-22.4 blowout here, that would probably end up being Abbott's ahead of Winter, but so those are basically interchangeable. Petrusma's relatively close behind. Winter would have to carry a lot of votes to the second place in order to get them in, which would most likely be Monday or maybe Brown. It really depends on. I mean, Brown's a more recognizable name. That's why I went with him, even though he was 0.2% behind. More recognizable name is kind of like incumbency. But then you have the carryover votes here. If there's a few other independents, they didn't have them named, so I wasn't able to put them down. But I wouldn't be surprised if, for example, the 7th slot was, in fact, another independent, if there are more independents in the field. So that's going to end up being 3 to 2 to 2, which is going to give another spot here from Franklin to the Liberals there, so that's going to give them another lead, which means that officially, I'm pretty sure at this point, that in theory, the Labor Party, if they did really well in Lyons, they could end up flipping it, but it's not really going to happen. At this point, it's basically set in stone that they're not going to do that well. And looking at how they did in Lyons last time, it's in theory possible. But in 21.1%, but then you had 3.2%. So number 5 was only at 7 there, 2.5, 5. So it's not looking that strong in Lyons from the start, from the carryover. But it ended up being 4 to 2 to 1 here. That's really going to be rough. They're actually losing more of the popular vote than the Labor did. Greens are actually gaining a bit. Independents are gaining a little bit. But for the most part, it's going to be. It could end up being very, very close. In the popular vote, it depends. YouGov has been very, very bullish on the Labor Party this cycle. If they end up being right, then they're definitely the Labor Party could actually end up having slim minority government here, actually outnumbering the Liberals, but that's pretty difficult to see, honestly, considering how big of a shift that would have to be. And I mean, they'd almost certainly have to only lose a popular vote by maybe a point or two, in order to make that happen. But they still can prove, obviously, to be a powerful opposition like they have for a while, banding together with the Greens and a few of the independents against the Liberals. But considering the fact that they're actually projected to both gain a seat, that's really not going to help much. So then we end up having Lyons, where we're going to end up having 35.7, just under 10 for the independents. Starting off with the Liberal candidates, Howlett's basically going to carry. Butler might end up beating him. It just depends on how well the Labor Party does. The end of the exact end of the night, because they're only 2.4% off. But then most likely Barnett's going to be able to help get carried across the line. Mitchell probably right behind, considering they're also have relatively high percentages. Tucker might be able to get on with the Nationals. It's unlikely, considering they're only getting like 5% of the vote, but a solid 3.8% might not be that bad. Offord is more likely to end up getting in, though, have second to last, and then Cameron, just because, again, that's going to be a good bit of the vote, but depends on how strong of a turnover there is. Shelton's on there as well, so it depends on how strong of a turnover the Liberals have. If their turnover game is relatively strong, there's enough consolidation that continues to move down one line and not split up amongst a lot of candidates, then they could end up picking off the 4th. Otherwise, Tucker, the Nationals might end up having one seat here, which is going to be in Lyons, which would be a relatively interesting pickoff. On a good night for the Labor Party, I think that's what would happen, because you end up actually having less support for Labor. They're not necessarily going to vote for Liberals. They're going to probably vote for the Nationals instead, which we might actually end up seeing anyways, considering the fact that their support almost that went up by 50% from mid-June to mid-July, and so it's not going to go up by that much more based on that trend, but it could be up to 6.5% of the vote, which might be enough to then get that to be around 5%, which could end up being enough to actually beat out, Cameron, for example, 3.9 with the more rollover vote as well, to end up getting to that spot. So that's really going to end up being the question there is how well can how much vote from the Liberals can the Nationals pull? That's only going to be able to really benefit the Liberals, but then the Liberals are also or the Labor Party is then having to worry about the Green Party, how much they're getting drained. So the question and all of that, and then of course there's the independents who are just drawing off vote from everybody at that point essentially. So the leadership polling, YouGov actually had the first ever preferred party leader being Winter right here, 55-45, which is actually outside of the margin of error on that same poll. So based on that, right now Winter is actually the preferred premier. But every single other poll, including this very large Demos AU poll, had a considerable lead for Rockcliffe, but a lot of unsure. So this could just be what happens when you push undecideds, is that most of them actually do like Winter, which could actually be a signifier that the Labor is going to overperform quite a bit tonight. But based on the consistent and two-party preferred actually does have slightly for Labor, so depending on how much of a two-party feeling there is, I guess you could say, the Labor Party could actually end up completely overperforming expectations, considering this is the most recent poll. But then again, not too recently, Demos AU did, of course, come through, and, with a 3,000 sample size poll, they did have a strong lead for the Liberals. So there's quite a bit of conflicting information. Only 2.1% margin of error, but then 3.2, that actually means the Labor Party could, in theory, win the popular vote based on that margin of error. And YouGov was actually relatively accurate in 2025 in Australia. So, but some of the interesting stuff is going to be the demographic breakdowns. Quite a bit of the we're seeing more of a gender breakdown here again, so more men are supporting the Liberals. There's actually generally just more of a support of the Liberals, but more men are choosing to support the Liberals than don't know, which is more of the women. Younger voters are a bit more towards Labor than older voters. You also have those same demographics for men, which actually are a relatively liberal over here, but more towards Labor once you get to about 30 to 44. And then you go back to being a bit more towards the Liberals. Same sort of thing, except it's generally just a bit more consistently trended towards Labor for the women. Undergraduates are less likely to support the Labor than people who have graduated university or also have completed grade 12. And then Liberals are mainly supporting Liberals. But these are, of course, the premier. This is the assumed premier. Labor Party, actually, interestingly, only 3/4 of them think that Dean Winter would be a better premier than Jeremy Rockcliffe, interestingly enough, compared to 93.7% there. But nationals are relatively don't really know. Quite a few people don't really know based on the not main two parties. And then the demographic breakdowns for the don't knows. This is going to be the 35. This was their top line: 35, 25, 15 and a half, 2 3/4, 2, 20. But men were more towards the Liberals, women were more towards Labor, women were a bit more towards the Greens, Nationals, men a bit more towards it, SFF, men a bit more towards it, women a bit more towards independence. So all of these demographic informations are relatively interesting. Of course, as always, we're going to be looking at those, the final results, of course, based on the final exit polls, and they're going to be weighted versus the turnout. But that is the final prediction here: 15 to 11 to 2 to 0 to 0 to 7 expected. from ETN here. So that is going to end up being at the very bottom. We can see 4-2-1. So that's going to end up sealing the fate of the Labor Party, but they will still be able to have some control here as the Liberals do not have a majority. So it'll be another minority government. Will this end up sealing another no confidence vote, bringing us back here in potentially another year? Who knows? But they could potentially end up forming an effective opposition government, or maybe they could the Liberals could end up picking up enough independents supporting that they could end up forming an effective majority government. We'll have to wait and see. Make sure to go out and vote. And thank you all for watching. Have a fantastic rest of your day.